Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, my name is Elder Price, and I would like to share with you the most amazing book. Hello, my name is Elder Grant. It's a book about America a long, long time ago. It has so many awesome parts, you simply won't believe how much this book can change your life. Hello, my name is Elder Green. I would like to share with you this book of Jesus Christ. Hello, my name is Elder Young. Hello, did you know that Jesus lived here in the USA? You can read all about it now. Hello, in this nifty book, it's free. No, you don't have to pay. Hello, my name is Elder Smith.
Hello, my name is Elder Bundy, and this is Voices from the Dust Radio for Tuesday, the 24th day of September, 2013. We welcome you to our show. We are studying the message of the voices that are now whispering out of the dust to a world reeling under a political, economic, religious, and cultural tempest. While the storm is raging ever more menacingly all over the globe, we are sharing the reason for the hope that lies within us, the reason why the Latter-day Saints are Christians, and why you should be too. So, welcome to Voices from the Dust Radio on this Tuesday, the 24th day of September, 2013. Well, these last few weeks, while we have been reading and studying the words of Jesus Christ, which he spoke to the Americans, the ancient Americans, concerning the fate of the Gentiles in America, others in talk shows across the nation have been talking about the fate of the United States of America in light of unprecedented revelations of crimes, treason, and treachery at the highest levels of government and industry. We noted that Glenn Beck has joined the growing chorus of those calling for impeachment of Obama and top leaders of Congress as well. Political and economic analysts have joined Christian pastors on conservative and libertarian talk shows across the nation to talk about the economic, political, and social demise of America. They often say, the end of America as we know it is now here, or some variation of that sentiment. Please note that you can get up to speed on a lot of these latest developments by watching the many videos available on the Situation Update, quote-unquote, page of our website, voicesfromthedust.org. There's a link here on our Blog Talk Radio site that'll take you directly to voicesfromthedust.org. And you can also tune in to the 24/7 KVFD radio station that is available on the blog page of the voicesfromthedust.org website. Just go to the main menu, everything is there, Situation Update and blog and radio page, everything. And on the blog, by clicking the blog item in the menu, you can access, you'll see our KVFD radio stream buttons that you can choose from to tune into it. All right. Well, yesterday we were discussing the dilemma presented by the parable of the Lord's Vineyard, given in section 101 of the LDS Doctrine and Covenants, starting with verse 43. The dilemma is, if the parable is treated as only applying to the events of the early LDS attempt to establish Zion in Missouri, which is the revealed location for the holy city, New Jerusalem, that the Book of Mormon, that Jesus reveals in the Book of Mormon, shall be built among the Gentiles, then it's difficult to explain the parable in terms of actual historical events, when church membership numbered much less than 5,000 members total. On the other hand, if the parable is treated as applying to the current conditions of the modern LDS Church, with millions of members worldwide, it's very easy to explain. It's very easy to explain the parable in terms of historical, current, and potential events to come, with the exception of a single crucial aspect. According to the parable, the Lord sends one of his servants to gather the strength of his house, which now is considerable, but the problem is that this servant is identified in Revelation as none other than the late prophet of the Restoration, Joseph Smith, Jr. Therefore, the only possibility that the parable can be explained in terms of events now unfolding or yet to unfold requires that Joseph returns to lead the Lord's army as a resurrected being. So, which do we choose? There are arguments for and against both interpretations, but I personally prefer to believe that the historical interpretation given by Sidney B. Sperry, which we discussed yesterday, cannot be justified. Recall that he explains the breaking down of the hedge protecting the vineyard in terms of what we might characterize as a neighborhood watch-like failure, where the town crier, so to speak, fails to sound the alarm in the 12 settlements of saints that he identifies with the 12 olive trees of the parable's vineyard. The servants were asleep in this regard, according to Sperry, and the cause of this was their failure to build the temple according to the commandments of the Lord, which in his view corresponds to the watchtower in the parable, which the servants started but failed to finish, because they did not believe that it was necessary in a time of peace. But each of these three interpretations of the parable's central elements, the hedge as a neighborhood watch, the 12 olive trees as 12 settlements of the saints in Missouri, and the watchtower as the temple that was started but not finished, has serious problems. Not the least of the problems with Sperry's interpretation, however, is that Zion was not redeemed by the military march of Zion's camp, which the men of the church embarked upon in the summer of 1834 under the direction of the prophet Joseph. On the other hand, given the advantage of the historical perspective that we enjoy today, almost 180 years later, we can see how a different interpretation of these three elements of the parable, the hedge, the olive trees, the 12 olive trees, and the watchtower that wasn't built, can be readily identified in a way that is consistent with past, current, and future events, and makes the parable terribly relevant to our awful situation the Lord warned us about in the Book of Mormon. The key change of this interpretation identifies 12 olive trees with the 12 offices of the Quorum of 12 Apostles, rather than the 12 settlements of the saints in 1835 Missouri. The hedge which protects them and their fruit is then easily identified as the U.S. Constitution, with its guarantee of religious freedom. Without this unprecedented protection in the most powerful nation of the world, the virulent opposition to the LDS Church would certainly have been shut down long ago. However, the religious freedom stemming from the U.S. Constitution literally hangs by a thread due to the enemy who's come by night, just as he does in the parable, and is now rapidly breaking it down. So soon, according to the parable, the servants of the Lord will arise, being affrighted, and flee, leaving the 12 trees to be broken down and the works of his servants to be destroyed. All right, we're going to continue explaining the parable, or our new interpretation of the parable, but let's bring on Al, our co-host here, and see what he has to say this morning. Good morning, Al.
Good morning. How are you today?
Oh, great. I've changed phones here. I'm off of the cell phone. I kept the last couple of programs. I lost 6 or 7 minutes of the program when I was dropped from the air. And so I've managed to get another phone. It's not a cell phone. It's a voice over IP phone. But I'm hoping that will work better if in case the problem. Well, not only was I dropping off, but I noticed the quality of the audio was really poor. So hopefully it sounds better now.
Yeah,
how are
it sounds
you doing
much
this
better.
Morning?
Good.
Oh,
I'm.
You can tell already, huh? Wow, that's really
yeah.
good.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's much plainer. It doesn't crack up and all that other stuff that's been happening. It sounds really good. Yeah, I've been listening. I just basically got you turned on about 4 minutes after. And you were talking about the Joseph Smith that in Winnipeg or whatever it's called that we talked about before. What did you call that before?
Oh, and Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Wikipedia is the online encyclopedia that has replaced real encyclopedias, I think. I mean, you have to take it a lot of times with a grain of salt, but yeah, we're going to get to that in the next program tomorrow. Here, I'm trying to explain exactly what the difference is between the two interpretations, the one that the church uses in the church education system that was written by Sidney B. Sperry, and then the one that we can now see from our perspective is the real interpretation, I think. Of course, I have to just speak for myself. I don't want to try to speak for anybody else, but this is a possibility, and I think it's a very good one. And it all comes easily when we identify that the 12 trees of the vineyards are not 12 offices. I mean, are not the 12 settlements on the frontier there by the LDS, early LDS members of the church, but it's actually the 12 offices of the apostleship. And when we make that identification, then it's easy to identify the hedge, it's easy to identify the tower, but the problem is that we're looking at something that's very frightening for Latter-day Saints today, and that is that the hedge is the U.S. Constitution, and that it's being broken down by an enemy that has come by night, and that then, to follow after that is the destruction of the 12 offices of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and then the destruction of the works of the servants. That's pretty scary.
Yeah. Well, the question, say from a viewpoint of a Pentecostal or a non-denominational church, is that they will be, I was almost going to say airlifted, but taken up.
Airlifted.
Yeah.
Lifted up, yeah.
Well, my background's military, so, and I did a lot of that. Anyway, that's, sometimes when you look at that, it's kind of, where are they coming from? Can you give me an answer to that, maybe?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean concerning the rapture of the non-LDS Christians?
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't really have any concept of this. This is pretty strictly Latter-day Saints. from the point of view of the Latter-day Saints, the idea of what's going to happen and how they get back to Missouri and build Zion, the new city called New Jerusalem, in the middle of the United States, because that's where Jackson County, Missouri is. If you look at a map, it's pretty much right smack dab in the middle of the United States. So the situation that we see today is this terrible one, as Isaiah calls him, is the enemy that is looming very menacingly above all of us. And we see all the, if you go to the situation update page, as I mentioned earlier, you can see that, you can actually see how this has come about and how they've corrupted our institutions, our educational, religious, and political institutions and financial institutions and everything else. It's really, you can really see why he's characterized as the terrible one, because of the great threat there is. And they're expecting to be those that believe in it. They don't all believe in it, but they're expecting to be caught up by Jesus Christ at any moment. If you listen to Brannon House, for instance, and Dr. DeYoung, that's often with him, who lives in Israel, and is often on his program, they talk about the rapture and expect it to come at any moment when they will be caught up and eat at the wedding feast, as it's described in the New Testament with Jesus. But at the same time, there are other pastors like Nathan Leal who try to prove to them that they're wrong. If they just read the Bible, they'll see that wedding feast doesn't take place till after the coming of Christ. And so there's a lot of discussion among them. But of course, they know nothing about this. Now, in the Book of Mormon, remember, the Lord said when the fullness of the gospel was declared unto the Gentiles, and the coming forth of it was then a sign to his people that they are about to be remembered in the covenants of the Lord and gathered into the lands of their inheritances, there would be people who would not believe it, and because of them, the servant of the Lord would be marred. And so he says, but they shall not hurt him, although he shall be marred by them, but I will heal him, he says. So something's got to happen to his servant that is declaring the Book of Mormon that will require his servant to be healed. And thus, and in the process, the Lord's wisdom will be shown to be greater than the cunning of the devil. So it's very, very important to understand how that then leads to what actually took place among the Latter-day Saints with Joseph Smith. And this parable that the Lord said he would, after they went down there and they attempted to begin the establishment of Zion in Missouri in the early days in the 1830s, and they met with failure and judgments of the Lord, then he explained to them in section 101, the first part, why he suffered those things that come upon them. And it really boils down to when the salt of the earth loses its savor, then it's good for nothing but to be cast out among men and trodden underfoot. Well, that was one thing to say. That's why those early saints were overcome and suffered so much when there were less than 5,000 of them. Can you imagine now in today's time when there's 15 million members of the church worldwide and 6 million or so on the books here in America. Of course, only a fraction of those are active Latter-day Saints, but you can imagine that's a pretty big army that can be built up and used to redeem Zion in the end.
Yeah, you're right.
So anyway, we have to ask ourselves then, who is the enemy? And if the watchman on the tower of course, is not able to spot his coming while he's yet far off, according to the parable, and sound the alarm to make ready so that the vineyard of the church would not fall into the hands of the destroyer, it's going to be a great evil, of course, as the Lord calls it. So we have to ask ourselves, we must ask ourselves, who is the enemy, and what could be built by the saints that would enable them to watch the enemy's preparations from afar? See, according to the parable, it would have to be something that the Lord commanded to be built, right? Because he commanded them to build a tower. But something also that the servants couldn't see the merit of, because their inability to understand the grave threat of the enemy and his tactics blinded them. So this, that doesn't fit with this idea of Sperry's that the tower was actually the temple. As we've already seen, it could not be the temple because the saints were very anxious to build a temple, but their enemies actually prevented them from building it. So that's quite a different situation than what we have here. It has to be something else. The tower has to be something that would enable them to see, quote unquote, the enemy that threatened the work of the 12 and its protective hedge. Well, it turns out that there is something that fits the bill perfectly. It's called the Council of the 50. The short name for the organization that Joseph was commanded to institute in 1842, which he managed to actually accomplish in 1844, 2 years later. But its formal name was the Kingdom of God and His laws, with the keys and powers thereof, and judgment in the hands of His servants, Amen Christ. It was a secret organization, which explains why most LDS people do not know about it today. And its foundation was laid, but it was discontinued in Utah after the saints made their way to Utah. It was discontinued after the death of Heber J. Grant in 1945, technically, though it hadn't really functioned since 1884, due to the contention that it wasn't worth much in a frontier setting when so much had to be done to meet together to talk about academic things. It came to be, according to one source that we can read in a journal, it came to be more of a debating society, quote unquote, than anything else. Of course, though, this fits the parable perfectly, since not only was it started but discontinued, and as it turns out, a secret debating society is just what the saints need today, where they would be able to study and understand the dangers of the secret combinations and their preparations from the roots of the Gentiles, and study their efforts, which have been ongoing from the beginning, to undermine the U.S. Constitution, protecting as a hedge the 12 trees of the vineyard in their work. Had the members been diligent in studying and teaching one another in theory, in principle, in doctrine, and in the law of the gospel, in all things that pertain unto the kingdom of God that are expedient for them to understand, including of things both in heaven and earth, both in heaven and in the earth and under the earth. Now, we've heard a lot about things built under the earth, including under the Denver airport out there. But things which have been, things which are, things which must shortly come to pass, things, in other words, in the past, things currently, and things that are in our immediate future, things which are at home, things which are abroad, the wars and the perplexities of the nations, and the judgments which are upon the land, and a knowledge also of countries and of kingdoms, they would have perceived and understood correctly the maneuverings and the wicked purposes of the enemy, and his initiatives and programs to destroy the hedge and ultimately the vineyard that it was protecting. It is the perfect answer to the New World Order's efforts over hundreds of years across many generations to tear down the liberty of those made free by the God of Israel. Does that make any sense, Al?
Yeah, it does. A lot of sense, but there's still a lot of detail people don't understand. And that's you're hitting areas that just kind of goes right over the top of some people's head.
Yeah, well, especially non-members of the church. Members of the church should understand this, at least if they've studied it. But you're right, that's the case. But of course, the good thing about Blog Talk Radio is that it's all recorded and stored in the archives, so people can go back and they can review what we're talking about here, and they can pause the recording and look things up and so on, and then of course they can call into the show and ask questions anytime they want. So I'm hoping that even though what you're saying is correct, it's going to be okay in the long run, that people will be able to understand it. But this is a big shift from what they are learning. Well, actually, I say what they're learning in church. The church, Sunday school, and priesthood manuals, as far as I've been able to determine, just skip right over this parable. They talk about the building up of Zion, as we talked about yesterday, and how, it's a time, we don't know when Zion's going to be redeemed, but we know that it will be redeemed sometime in the future. In the meantime, the purpose of the church is to preach the gospel, redeem the dead, and perfect the saints, with the idea that as they're becoming more perfectly acquainted with their duties and with how the things of the Lord work, during this 180 years since these things happen, that they will be prepared for when it comes down. But none of them. They've got this white horse prophecy that they call it, and the brethren have tried to disclaim it and refute it, that it's not revelation, but that's what most of them understand, and that's what they will talk about, that the elders of Zion will go forth and save the Constitution when the time comes, and then they will march triumphantly back to Missouri, I guess. But they don't have this idea that the parable that the Lord has given us that shows these awful destructions will come to pass. So there's the fact that the work of the servants is destroyed, and that those 12 trees are broken down, is a little disconcerting, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree. But they have been talking about it. They had a lesson at our church, and I didn't get around to seeing it. And on the same subject that you're talking about with with Joseph Smith and everything. So I need to pursue that a little bit myself to find out who was coming.
That would be great if you studied it. Now we've got 60 seconds left. Next time we're going to be talking about this part that really prevents us from using this latest interpretation, which is the fact that Joseph Smith has to lead the saints according to the revelation back to Zion. So that's difficult because he could only do it as a resurrected being now. But we're going to look at that in tomorrow's program, and we wish everybody a good day tomorrow, and that